are. Okay.
Recording in progress.
Oh. Okay. Hey, Sean. We aren't quite ready for you yet, but
All right.
okay, don't want to go already everything.
One looks like I'm talking. Yeah. You
You are
push,
taller
you
than me.
push. You just push it
I'm
down.
like, ugh.
It's not that stiff. Goof.
What does my phone just in that?
You pull it out. Yeah,
Yeah. I can keep it.
I know you can. You're a very capable.
Delilah, back to bed. Sorry.
That's on. You got that recorded too. That's
Perfect.
great. Yeah.
That's what I was going for.
Maybe I should mute us while we're at it. Yeah.
Okay.
For the moment. So I'm just going to wait for someone to tell me that they're ready.
You can start it in a minute.
It was weird having a camera pointed
Can you hear them?
relatively up. No,
Oh, you shouldn't.
I can't hear a thing. Our volume is up.
Everybody muted? Oh, yeah. Okay. Mhm.
Everyone's muted
Okay.
except for this person.
Okay. Can anybody type in the chat that you can hear, just to make sure our audio is working? Yes.
Thumbs up.
Thanks,
you.
Carol.
Thank you, Carol.
Okay. So if you want to wait like 2 minutes and then start, that'd be great.
All right.
All right.
This is just the most awkward 2 minutes ever.
Sorry. You can introduce yourself.
I can introduce myself if anyone's interested. I mean, they'll be listening to me for a little while. My name is Sean. I'm Eva's husband. I'm a horticulturist, member of the Master Gardeners of Ontario. And today we will be talking about invasive plants. In particular, what I'd rather this be is more of an open conversation. Sorry, you're probably going to hear our dog and our daughter in the background periodically. So when I say an open conversation, I mean, please feel free to use the chat feature, write down your messages, ask any questions. I mean, everyone's camera is off, but like if you could raise a hand, metaphorically, I guess, feel free to do so at any time, because I'd rather this be more of a conversation than a lecture. Are we good? Has that been 2 minutes?
You're good.
Is that enough riffing for everybody? Okay. So invasive plants, if you're here for a comprehensive list, you're in the wrong place, because it turns out there are thousands of invasive plants in Ontario alone. So a quick summary of what I'm going to be talking about. I hope everybody is here and listening, because I haven't seen any sort of like acknowledgement that people are listening. I'm just hoping that they are.
I put it on full screen. Sorry.
You put it, it is.
Just go.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about what is an invasive plant. It seems like a very obvious question, but it needs to be addressed. Plants to avoid at the garden centers, that's a hot ticket for a lot of people. And what that mostly is as a gardener, as a groundskeeper, like that's my job. These are things that really piss me off. Sorry, I know I'm going to keep it PG, but oh, thank you, Mary. How to deal with them. There are so many different methods that we can discuss. That one, I expect there's going to be a lot of questions. So again, feel free to use the chat feature at any time. What can we do long term? There's a couple of different things, but yeah, we'll get to that. And then native habitat initiatives. So that's just something that a project that I'd like everybody to get involved with if we can. So what is an invasive plant? The short answer is up top there. It's a plant that causes more harm than benefit. So there's a number of criteria that plants have that are measured so that it would be beneficial or detrimental. So if it outcompetes a native species, if it is toxic to consume, if it takes over the landscape, how fast does it grow, whether or not it provides any benefit. So is it a food source for any local wildlife, insects or animals or people even. And all of those factors are added together to give it a sort of score. Now I'm going to be talking about one organization in particular in a moment, but there are a number of organizations that is their oh, hello, somebody else joined. Sorry. There are a number of organizations that is their entire mandate, is to calculate levels of invasiveness. So changing or destroying an ecosystem, yeah, relative toxicity. So I gave the example of buckthorn in there, or toxicity to animals such as nightshade. So buckthorn, that's one that we're dealing with.
Oh, are we?
It's that big guy right there outside the window.
How dare you? I love that.
I
tree.
see, that's the
Wow,
problem.
I'm just trying to see how I don't want my,
You want to be muted? I can mute you.
yes, I want to,
You are muted. Sorry, Gail, or you're welcome, Gail, whichever. Buckthorn as an example of something that changes the toxicity. So buckthorn, along with a couple other plants, can have an impact on the soil ecology as well. So they can change the relative pH, and they can influence what grows around them, and more importantly, what doesn't grow around them. So buckthorn is annoying. It grows these big, small berries, but a lot of them. And it's very easily confused with, I'm going to give myself an out here, choke cherry and other types of cherries. I was told that it was a choke cherry, and I believed that for years until somebody corrected me and I realized, oh yeah. And it turns out it is now, I can't not see it. It is everywhere. Those cherries, those little berries are in fact poisonous. Don't eat them. They taste bad. So that's a good indication that you shouldn't be eating them. But because of this, they spread so prolifically thanks to the birds. And it's kind of a sad thing because it's
so pretty.
It's so pretty. It is. And in the fall, when our tree is covered in birds and drunk squirrels because they're eating the fermented berries, it is really pretty, but it's sad. They'll spread prolifically. They'll take over a forest area or even a residential area. Nightshade. So nightshade, that's an entire family. That's of course the Solanaceae family. That's
of course.
tomatoes.
Invasive.
Some are. So the reason why it's an issue is that some nightshades are toxic. And so for years, for decades, for centuries, people thought tomatoes were toxic because of their relation to other nightshades that were toxic. But deadly nightshade is probably the one that springs to mind. It's colorful, it's attractive to kids, and that makes it a dangerous plant that you might see everywhere. That's one that we're dealing with in our backyard. We have a relatively small property. I can point it out in the summer if you're interested. So another thing to discuss, there are certain terms that are surprisingly controversial, such as native plants, naturalized, and invasive. So right now there is, and this is where I might lose some of you, there is a bit of contradiction in a conversation around what is a native plant, not just what is an invasive plant. And the general accepted definition at this point in time is a plant that was present in an area approximately 150 years ago, pre-colonialization, pre-Europe spreading over the globe. But that's not entirely accurate. And so I'm very much so pro planting native, but plants change, plants adapt, plants evolve. And so we have cultivars of a lot of native species that aren't invasive, but they are not the original varieties that existed 150, 200 or so years ago, but that are still beneficial. So let me an example of one that has been changing a lot. I'm blanking on the name. Rudbeckias, black-eyed Susans, coneflower, echinaceas, coneflowers. These are native species in North America and in Ontario, but there are so many hybridized and naturalized is not the right word, hybridized and cultivars available that are still beneficial. It is probably best practice to go with the original varieties, a traditional purple coneflower and black-eyed Susan. But if you're using the cultivars, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We're going to get into some gray area with native plants, hybrids, and invasive plants. Naturalized is another term that I want you all to be familiar with. There are plants that are not native to an area. And again, native plants and invasive plants is subjective to wherever you happen to be. There are plants that are not native to an area, but are not causing harm, and in fact, give more benefit than they do harm. A good example of that in Ontario is Queen Anne's lace, Docus carota, wild carrot. It's a host plant to a number of caterpillar species. It survives on the sides of highways. It likes dry, compact, infertile soils, but it doesn't spread super prolifically. It won't take over. Native species can compete with it for that space. But that's in Ontario. And interestingly enough, if you were to look at British Columbia on the West Coast, wild carrot in particular, for some reason, Queen Anne's lace is on their invasive species list. And so that's a good example of how native and invasive plants are very subjective, very regionally based. Even within Ontario, we have several different ecozones and types of environments that change. We have a couple different hardiness zones as well, as I'm sure everyone listening to this would be aware. And at the bottom there, I have a little blurb. The question here, Mary says to everyone, what category would sweet peas we see on the side of the road on the 124? So sweet pea is an interesting one. If it's a wild sweet pea, like if we're talking about the weed variety, that is invasive. There is an invasive variety of sweet peas, but there are a lot of cultivated varieties. There are a lot that we've added for the floral aesthetic of the flower, just the beauty, and some for consumables, for vegetable sweet peas, right? Right now, if you were to go to, say, a big box store and look for sweet peas, you're probably not going to find them with the vegetables. You'll probably find them with the flowers, the seeds, and that's because it's a cultivated variety. I'll tell you right now, as far as I'm aware, it's not invasive in Ontario. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not worried about sweet pea. So I have here at the bottom of this page, planting edibles. So just something for a little ethical consideration. I had an interesting conversation with another master gardener a couple months ago, discussing people who plant 100% edible landscaping. They want to take their property and they want to eat everything on it. And she said, she told me that it was incredibly arrogant. And I was baffled, especially in today's economy. Like, of course, you want to take full advantage of your landscape, of your space. And she said how selfish and arrogant it is for someone to take a piece of property, a piece of land, even if it's theirs, legally speaking, and terramorph it into something that's strictly for you and providing no benefit to necessarily to the local wildlife, to the local insects, and to the local animals. You build fences, you spray insecticides and stuff like that. You try and keep these pests out of your edible garden. And I just thought it was incredibly provocative, that thought. So something to consider if you're going to be planting an edible landscape, or if you're focusing on edible landscape, is perhaps giving more native plants for other native species a second thought. There are several trees and shrubs and flowers that aren't necessarily, something that will be directly beneficial to you, but would be beneficial to, say, local insects that can then help to pollinate. You know, it's a whole circle of life. So just a little food for thought, no pun intended there. Eva's taking notes here. What you got there?
Oh, I just know I have to track.
Oh, you have tracks. Okay, she's tracking statistics, everybody. So plans to avoid at the garden center. So can you guys, I don't mean that in a gender way. Can you people, I don't know, spot the pattern? I'm going to talk about just these are like my top 5 or 6. I think I might have 7 in here. Try and spot the pattern of why these are things to avoid. So first we have purple loose strife, devastating to wetlands, roadsides, and disturbed farmlands. It outcompetes, it'll steal nutrients and space for native plants, and it will spread incredibly fast. So purple loose strife was a plant that was introduced, I don't know how many years ago, and it very quickly spread. So it was first introduced as an ornamental, as a perennial, as a beautiful flower, good for bees and butterflies, what have you. Relatively hardy as well. I actually see them up north. There's this little guy down here. Sorry, can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry, Eva's here. It very quickly spread in ditches and roadsides and
Keep on.
okay. A little distracting. She's touching the computer.
Sorry.
No, you just changed the page on me.
Sorry.
Hey, I figured out how to do this. We got buttons. Okay, we're back to it. Very quickly took over farmland, along ditches, along roadsides, and then as the land was being cultivated, it actually spread those seeds, and it made it very difficult for a lot of crops. And as it spread into other areas that were not maintained, other wild spaces, it became a problem very quickly. Went on, the invasive species list. Periwinkle, everybody's favorite shady ground cover. Everybody loves it. I don't know why. It loves shade. It's solid. It spreads fast. It gives nothing. And that's its biggest problem. So it'll take over space. It'll make it hard in already difficult areas such as forest floors where there's not a lot of local flora growing to begin with, and they give nothing. Not many animal species do actually eat it, if any. And the flowers, if they do actually bloom, they require just a little bit of sunlight for them to bloom. They provide nothing. It's like a distraction. It's an empty target for a bee to come over and realize it's been fooled. They spread really fast, and they're darn near impossible to fully get rid of if you are trying to get rid of them. So they spread underground, mostly by rhizomes, but they're also incredibly easy to propagate. And because of that, because of how hardy they are, garden centers and like you can take a cutting with a single leaf and just stick it in. Oh my gosh, they are cheap and easy, and they fill up a ground cover very fast. Now, as I continue this, by the way, I do have some solutions, so stay tuned. But if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt at any time. Goutweed, in particular, variegated goutweed. I don't see the regular non-variegated goutweed very often, but I do sometimes see it. Snow on the mountain is another name that I've seen it. Snow in summer, that's also a different plant, but they share a lot of common names. Very fast spreading. Oh, we have somebody who's back, who is not muted. I don't know who's talking. That's fine.
You're doing really good on it.
Oh, thanks.
It's fun.
Very fast spreading, shade tolerant ground cover. If you give it a little bit of sunlight, much like periwinkle, it will in fact bloom. Those blooms, they do have a slight smell to them. They're okay. I wouldn't call them particularly florally smelling. Particularly fragrant is the word I was looking for.
Hyping up these plants, sounding too positive about the bad plant.
I'm getting there. Well, okay. So fast spreading, shade tolerant ground cover can be appealing, and which is why they are sold at garden centers. But that's also why they're dangerous. Thank you. That is a very good point. I don't mean to be hyping them up. I'm not supportive of these plants. These are all on the no list. These are plants that you will see at the garden center, and you should avoid with a 10-foot pole. And don't like shame the garden centers because most of them don't know what they're selling. I'll be honest with you. When they do flower, and they will have clusters of flowers, those seeds are teeny tiny and in the thousands. And so they will also spread by seed really fast. And if you try and get rid of it, it is also darn near impossible to fully eradicate. Let's see, can flower, yeah. Oop. Japanese knotweed. Now this has been in the news for the past couple of years. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about this one. The reason why it's a bit of a problem, you can see that little picture in the corner. They start really small, rather innocuous, not a big deal. Kind of looks like horsetail, kind of looks like a couple different plants, a little asparagus maybe. As in their small stages, I'm not hyping them up, I swear. In their small stages, they are edible. I'm not hyping them up. But that is to say that you can eat them. So if you see them in their small infant stage, in that picture down below, feel free to eat them like asparagus. They are incredibly fast growing, thick and dense, and that is where their problem lies. So they are making it impossible for native species to grow in that kind of an area. And so they'll quickly eradicate other native species and take over. And they also spread by rhizome, which is the underground roots. And they have been known to break through hardscaping, any patios, even asphalt, they break through concrete. They are strong. Tropical milkweed. So everybody wanted to save the butterflies. That was a big thing that happened. When did that start? Years ago. I think it's been going on forever, but oh yes, absolutely. But the save the butterflies trend gave rise to plants like this, the tropical milkweed. Now there are a number of beneficial milkweed plants, swamp milkweed, for example, or the butterfly weed, the tuberous one. Because all of these names are relatively similar, it gets very confusing. So at the top there, I have the botanical name Asclepia, which should have an S at the end of it, Curasabica. And I gave you a picture of a particular brand that I saw this seed for sale, unfortunately, on the right-hand side there. So tropical milkweed is a milkweed that's native to Mexico, not the rest of North America. And this particular milkweed can have spores of a protozoan parasite. So it's it's a tiny little, like the size of a cell, parasite called the OE parasite. I'm not even going to try and read that name there because it's, yeah. Ophryacistis electroschira. I just tried. I said I wouldn't, and I did. So they're sold as an annual seed. They are hardy to zone 911. That's like, again, Mexico. But the problem is because they have this, potentially have this parasite, when the caterpillar larvae of monarchs and some other butterfly species consume the foliage of these plants, they can ingest that parasite, and that parasite continues to grow inside their gut. It just lives inside their gut. And as they chrysalis and metamorphosis, and they transform into the butterfly, it can hinder the development and growth of the butterfly, leading to misshapen torsos, curled up and damaged wings. I know, it's really sad. I didn't put a picture up here because I can already see Eva's sad face, and so it's not a pretty picture. If you're looking to rear these sorts of like monarch butterflies, if you're raising caterpillars of monarch butterflies, if you see black spots in the chrysalis, in that it's not a cocoon, but you know what I mean? That's an indication that they are infected and should, I hate to say it, should be, mention it to the proper authorities so they can deal with it. Not to be confused with common milkweeds and butterfly. Yeah. So please leave the milkweeds in your ditch unless they're this guy. It is a self-seeding annual. So even though it's sold as an annual, the seeds can overwinter, and that's rather unfortunate. So the vibrant red and the yellow orange, those two varieties, don't do it. Please don't do it. Himalayan balsam, another one that we are dealing with in our backyard.
We have all of them.
We have a lot of these because these were sold at garden centers. It's so they do the reason why they were sold, and again, I'm not hyping them up. They're beautiful, like orchid bell-shaped flower. It kind of looks like a giant jewel weed, and you can treat it as such. So that stem is very, very thin and grows very fast, and it's actually tall. It's like 7 to 8 feet tall at its peak. It's taller than me. I can walk through it in my backyard and in the ditch down below. You don't go down there very often.
No, I didn't wander in the ditch very often.
No, so they're tall, dense, rapid growing, high volume of seed production. Each plant can produce up to 800 seeds. And that little seed pod, which has a couple dozen seeds in it, twists as it develops and pops. And so it has an exploding seed pod that spreads. So they're a self-seeding annual that will spread and take over, fast growing, very dense. Let's see here. But I mean, yes, they do have nectar for pollinators. So it's one of those, it's more detrimental than it is beneficial, though there is a tiny benefit. Bush honeysuckle. So these are in our front yard. Those I know, I'm so sorry. The thing is, those are not a problem. Those they could be. So did I say Tartarian? It's Tartarian, I think. Typos, they happen. Bush honeysuckle. Again, very dense. It's a shrub. It's a hardy shrub. What about the pleurisy root Asclepia tuberosa? So I did mention, let me go back to that then. Boop, boop, boop. So I did say Asclepia tuberosa, or butterfly weed, is a little perennial. It's borderline hardy in this area. It's as far as I'm aware at the moment, not a problem, unless you know something that I don't. Pleurisy root. I haven't heard that name before, but yeah, if you know something that I don't, it's not on my problem list. Okay. So back to the honeysuckle. It's thick, dense, and outcompetes native species. Sold at Richter's, good for monarchs. Yes. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I thought you were asking what like that should be on my no list. No. It is good. It's solid. So it's another Asclepia species. So it is a milkweed in that genus. That is not a problem. Yeah. So technically, tropical milkweed is also good for monarchs, but it's bad because it can have the parasite. So as far as I'm aware, the one that you had mentioned, Asclepia tuberosa, is on my list as not being a potential host of that parasite. Sorry, yeah, fire truck just went by. Yeah, so it should not be a problem unless there's something I don't know, which there could very well be. Bush honeysuckle, the problem is how dense it is. So I don't know if you noticed, before I move on, the pattern with a lot of these invasive species is how they outcompete native species. So that's the biggest factor. So some of them are toxic, some of them are they are fast growers, but a lot of them it's their density and how if they outcompete native species, they'll take over that landscape, and that native species has a hard time coming back. Okay. So here are some things for you. Excuse me. So if you're looking for a more comprehensive list and in fact a guide for Ontario, the Ontario Invasive Species Council, the OISC, has a website, ontarioinvasiveplants.ca. They have a guide for Southern and Northern Ontario. I would suggest reading both of them. We're kind of on the border. That is a Grow Me Instead guide. So they have a more comprehensive list than what I gave you. I gave you my top, what was it, 6 or 7 big baddies, but they have a number of others and suggestions. So the big thing that people want things like periwinkle and snow on the mountains for is their ability to make a landscape green, to be a beautiful thick ground cover. Now there are native species that can adapt to a lot of situations. Wild strawberries, good for full sun and drought. They're good on a hillside if you got a full sun situation. Wild ginger, we have some on the side over here, good on a north facing side in the shade as a big thick kind of almost lily pad like leaf. Bearberry, wintergreen's a very good one. They're very good in a forested area. They like it acidic. They like conifers and that sort of area. They have little berries that are edible and their foliage is edible and minty. What else? Foam flower, wild geranium. Oh, it smells so good if you walk through wild geranium. The foliage of wild geranium, I love the smell. Mayapple, bunchberry. Canada, that is Canada's national flower is the bunchberry. And running euonymus. Grasses. Now I didn't list out a couple invasive grasses. There are a number of them. It's basically every single grass you find at the garden center. Just to put it bluntly, it's the vast majority of them. So here's a list of a few native species that I have a hard time finding, but there is a native plant nursery in Bracebridge that I get my native plants from, and she has these from time to time, but she sells out really fast. I'm not super fond of grasses, to be perfectly honest with you. But yeah, so if you're interested in a more comprehensive list, the Ontario Invasive Species Council also has a free to anyone downloadable Excel spreadsheet that it has all of the plants. There are thousands of them in Ontario, how invasive they are, their botanical name and all that stuff. And more than just plants, they have fish and wildlife, they have fauna, they have insects, they have arachnids, anything that's invasive, they have it on their spreadsheet or they're actively working on it. They're always updating. So that's
mustard plant.
wild mustard. Yes, that's a big one.
What do you have to tell us?
Do we have a Karen in this group?
Yes.
Sorry, our daughter just came downstairs and she decided to tell us about her friend Karen.
Okay, let's go back upstairs.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah, go check out their Grow Me Instead guide. That's a very good resource for anyone. It's free. Yeah, I am fully supporting of free information. That's why I like to do stuff like this. Let's see. Dealing with invasive plants. Bloodroot is another lovely shade flower for spring bloom that grows here in abundance. I found it easy to transplant. Cool. Bloodroot. I have a different I have an image in my head and I can't quite picture what it is yet. I'll look that up later. Dealing with invasive plants. So there's a number of ways you can deal with invasive plants. I get this question far too often. There are chemicals you can buy. Please don't. You are not more likely than not. I don't know who you are individually, but more likely than not, Sanguinaria canadensis. Oh, okay, yeah, cool. More likely than not, you are not a licensed sprayer. There are some that you don't need a license for. You can go buy it. Please don't. Just generally speaking, we live in an environment, especially in Ontario, I don't care where in Ontario you live, where we are surrounded by bodies of water, large and small. The runoff of chemical application is just enormous. Tilling, you can. It's not ideal. What you're doing is you're disturbing the soil, you're disturbing the soil microbes, you're destroying beneficial bacteria. And what you're also possibly doing is spreading the seeds and rise. Hi.
Reading.
Okay. Spreading the seeds, planting them, making them, you're essentially making it ideal for those weed seeds to be spread, as well as splitting those rhizomes. So plants like periwinkle or Japanese knotweed or goatweed, if you split those rhizomes, you're essentially multiplying your plant. Digging by hand, that's my job. That's what I do a lot of. But it's my preferred method is continuous cutback of your weeds and overplanting with native plants. So instead of those invasive plants choking out your native species or your garden or whatever, I continuously cut them back, and I encourage my native plants to outgrow them, to overshadow them, so then they get smothered and overshadowed and die off, but their roots are still there. They can still decompose and feed the organic material back into the soil. You're not disturbing the soil or anything like that. It's a very arduous process, but well worth it. So the Molo and cardboard smother, I've done that a couple times, in particular back there in our vegetable section. So I put in a couple vegetable beds over there directly on the ground. They're barely raised by 8 inches. I mowed it as low as my mower would allow, and then I put down a layer of cardboard, and then I put in a layer of mulch. I put in our beds, and I filled it with a mix of topsoil and compost. And the cardboard itself smothered the weeds, didn't allow them to grow back, and then decomposed. And now the cardboard is essentially gone, the weeds are gone, and my gardens are in place. There's another method along with the smothering called solarizing. I apologize, I didn't put it in there. And that's a very thick plastic, essentially, or any solid impermeable material that doesn't allow light or moisture to get through. This is a temporary thing. So you're putting down clear plastic or thick black plastic. If you're putting clear plastic down, what essentially you're doing is a greenhouse effect at such a close proximity to the ground that you're burning all the plant matter in that area. You're frying it. The soil is okay at that point. And then when all the weeds are dead, you then take your plastic or cardboard away, and you can start relatively fresh. Now, some of your weeds will survive that, but it's a very much no effort method. Like, you don't have to put in a lot of physical effort with that. Would these methods work for poison ivy? Yes. Poison ivy is super tricky though. Both identifying and the fact that it is surrounded by other plants usually. So that's kind of the problem with poison ivy is it's never just by itself where you can deal with it en masse. So what I have done in the past for some of my cottage clients for poison ivy is I step on them with really fat boots. I wouldn't recommend that to everyone. That's the thing. So I flatten them out so that they're ground level. You're breaking the stem and killing them off, and then other plant species that are in that area grow up. Otherwise, you'd have to really protect all of your layers of skin and rip it out by hand. Now that's if you're getting if somehow your poison ivy is in such a large number that you are concerned, you can contact, there are licensed sprayers in the area. So I would go through the Ontario Invasive Species Council, explain your situation. They can either find or recommend somebody or come out and deal with it themselves. If it is in fact that big of an environmental impact, sometimes they can come out and deal with it. When is a good time for plastic sheeting? Anytime. Well, I mean, not like now. No, not in the winter. So sorry, for the plastic stuff, if you put it down in the spring and you wait until maybe little after the early section of the summer, you want that heat to be there, but also in the spring you really want to prevent the water from getting to those weeds, but you don't want to alter the flow of water, if that makes sense. So when we did it for our vegetable section, when I did it for our vegetable section, I put it down in the fall. And that way I had mowed everything low already. And then I put down a plastic tarp. That was that was a section that I am no longer growing vegetables in. And then I switched to the cardboard method the following year. So when I first used the plastic method, I had tarps available to me. So I put it down in the fall, it survived the winter, and then in the spring, I waited until the heat of the summer. So late spring, early summer, and then I took it off. Now you can apply it if you decide you want to change that area anytime that's not winter. But if you do it in, say, the dead of summer, when you have a drought and severe heat hitting that tarp and really, really burning and heating up that area, that would be ideal. Midsummer would be the most effective. And that still gives you the fall to try and rebuild whatever that area is. So you can be planting more native species or even seeds if you want to get seeds of native species in that area. Is the poison ivy in Whitestone West Perry Sound? Poison ivy's everywhere. Yeah. Sorry. Sorry, I don't react to it either. I feel so bad talking about it. I've once used a string trimmer through poison ivy wearing shorts, and I didn't know that. This was years ago. And my boss came over back then. My boss came over to me like, you know, that's poison ivy, right? I'm like, I
When you were young.
Yeah, when I was young. Yes, poison ivy is in Whitestone and Perry Sound and everywhere, I'm afraid. I personally, I don't see it a lot in residential areas. I have a couple of cottages I take care of a couple of cottages in Lake of Bays, Huntsville, up to Whitestone Lake. So I cover a big range, and I actually don't see it very often. So that's, I know that it exists and I've run into it, but I honestly, it's not a huge problem at the moment for my cottages that are heavily landscaped. There you go. We have a little in La Broche Lake. That's cool. Is stinging nettle a native plant? That is a good question. I don't think it is, but I don't think it's invasive either. I'll have to get back to you on that one because it's not on my problem list. And so I'm never really worried about it. Jewelweed grows in the same area and is the cure for the poison ivy rash. That's interesting. Thank you. I didn't know that. That's a fun fact. While we're on the fun facts, stinging nettle, the sap within the stem of stinging nettle is in fact a numbing agent for the sting of the nettle itself. And it's supposedly, I'm not an herbalist, very good for things like asthma and stuff like that, stinging nettle. It is in the mint family. I don't know if it's native or not, but I'm fairly confident that it's not, but it's not invasive either. Arthritis too. Great. I will keep that in mind. That's good to know as it really stings. It does. It does. If you want to make a poultice out of it and try that, I'm not an herbalist and I'm not a doctor, so I shouldn't say that, but I should. Sorry, you did not hear that from me. So at the very bottom in big, fat, bold, italic letters, I say do not use landscape fabric. This is the scourge, one of the biggest misconceptions in gardening and landscaping. There are a number of beneficial uses of landscape fabric. It is not your garden. If you're putting down the fabric that is black and permeable, and you're doing that as a layer above the soil and below the mulch, it is not going to prevent weeds in any capacity. Weeds will still spread underneath and poke through, or spread across the surface and the roots will still grab it. And then you pull out the weeds and the fabric and it's a mess. Please don't. And this is me saying that very PG for your benefit.
She'd stripped all of her sheets off for bed and wanted new ones.
Oh, fun. So our daughter's having fun. Okay. Native Habitat Initiative. So this is something that there's a couple different organizations out there that are doing something similar. I don't know the words that they're using, so I'm calling it the Native Habitat Initiative. It's essentially leaving a space, designate some part of your property if you can, and leave it alone. Just see what grows. We did this a couple years ago with a part of our lawn. You don't remember the giant daisy? Okay, so like a giant chunk, I'd say that was like 20 feet by 20 feet. And we just left it alone. We didn't mow it. So we had whatever plants came out. We had wild daisies, yarrow, and a number of other things. And they all had different stages of when the flowers came up and different heights. It was beautiful to see. Essentially, the thought process is that between Mexico and northern Canada, it's becoming far too urban, far too commercialized, that there are not a lot of wild spaces for these migratory insects or even native insects to just rest, to just live how they want to live. And so there's a very small thing that every individual person can do, much like recycling. It's a small thing that you can do to leave a space alone and not touch it. She was singing Lilo and Stitch. That's wonderful. So plant native, that's another thing you can do. Plant if you want to find some more native plants. I'm composing a list as we speak, but I'm working in conjunction with Laura Thomas from the Hidden Habitat, which is a native plant nursery in Gravenhurst, Bracebridge, that area. It's south of Bracebridge, I believe, northern Gravenhurst. There's also a company in, I believe they're out of Sudbury. And I didn't put their business here because I forgot it and I haven't been able to find them since, but they produce seeds of native plants. I think it's called Northern Wildflowers, and I apologize. I've been meaning to find them and I can't find them again, but somebody told me about them. Plant diverse. So please consider more than just flowers, more than just vegetables. It is more than your personal feelings of aesthetic and function. Add more trees, shrubs, and native grasses to provide food and shelter. The Georgian Bay Biosphere sells native plants in the spring. Fantastic. That's also a wonderful resource as well. Be a little bit wary of your box stores and of your even the larger garden centers. I'm not trying to cast shade or doubt upon them, but a lot of the times I'll go in there and they have native plants and I'm like, yeah, no, I know that's not. I know. So just take everything with a grain of salt, even what I'm saying. Thanks for coming. So this is just me. That's me. That's my information. If you ever feel like finding me, and I don't feel like I feel weird talking about myself. So that's. Are there any other questions? So far, no. You can unmute yourself at this point, I think, if that's okay. Yeah, you can unmute yourself or type them into the chat here. How's the Instagram going? Oh, there's a hand raise. I didn't know that was a thing. Hello, Margaret.
Hi, just a question. Do you have comments about shoreline habitat and native plants? I know that there's a tendency to want to clean up the shoreline, to put sand down for beach.
Yeah, so
what do we need to do to kind of draw in the wild edges for the great blue herons and the turtles and the frogs?
so that's I do have comments. Depending on where you live, you should really look into your local municipality. I work a lot with the Lake of Bays area, and their bylaws are you're not allowed to touch 20 feet off of the shoreline for that very reason without licensing or anything like that. So something to keep in mind if you're planning on landscaping, definitely double check whether or not you're allowed to. A lot of people do it anyways. So if you happen to spot these sorts of things, this isn't like a tattletale situation. You can send an email, a politely worded concerned email to your local, wherever you happen to be. If you're out on the water and you see them dumping in a big, like you're out on a boat and you see this cottage dumping a big load of sand on the shoreline, yeah, you can send them an email of wherever you happen to be, that local municipality. Sand bad, no sand. Yes, I was going to say that, no sand. What about lily pads? Are they invasive or are they a sign of a clean lake? I don't. I know that there are some that are invasive, and the problem is they're sold as ornamental aquatic plants for like your private pond or pool or something like that. There are some that are native, and so this is where we get into invasive cultivars and varieties. So a lot of lily pads that you see are not meant to be there. I hate to say it, in swampy areas. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have a good answer for you. I would have to look up when you're gonna go, if you're gonna go shopping for lily pads, for example, or aquatic plants, make note of their botanical name and look it up. Don't take the word of the garden center. That's for sure. And if you're dumping anything, even if it's aquatic, oh, that's one thing I didn't mention, is emptying out your planters and stuff like that. Please be very careful. A lot of ornamental planters that you find are full of invasive, either self-seeding invasive plants or plants that will take over. One that I didn't mention today was English ivy, which is a borderline hardy around here, but it has been known to survive. And they're a very common house plant or ornamental plant or in a tropical arrangement. I've seen lamium as well. There are species of lamium that are not native that are also invasive that'll take over a forest floor, but they look pretty and they smell nice. Cattails are native, so don't worry about cattails. Sorry, that was a short and sweet question. So lily pads, I don't know if they're a sign of a clean lake. I just know that they spread really fast. My apologies. It's probably safer for me to tell you that I'm not too sure. So one other thing to mention, because we're talking about more than just plants here, is when you are getting your planters, if you are buying pre-arranged planters or any plants from the garden center, when you're taking that plant out before you plant it or dump it in the forest or whatever you happen to do, please be mindful of jumping worms. That's an invasive species of worm that is now taking over North America. They are rather prolific in Toronto, and they've now entered, I've heard stories of North Bay and beyond. So this is a non-native worm species that is large and is out competing other worms. And that's just
What does it look like?
It's got a fat head. It's a really big worm that has a fat head. That's but my point being that earthworms are also technically not native.
What?
So Eva is shocked. She doesn't listen to me when I talk about horticulture around the house. Do we have any other questions? And you know what? What I'm gonna say is it's not up there because I'm foolish, but on that website there is my email address. And if you have any other plant related questions, feel free to email me there. I have no problems with that. What are your thoughts regarding our raised bed gardens, hugelculture? Do we get a thumbs up? Do we have cautions for the future?
His mixed opinion, I'm not gonna lie.
Okay. Hugelculture. I do have mixed opinions because it's not always done right. So if you're putting in big, thick, chunky logs, little sticks are fine, but you're still going to get air gaps. Those sorts of woody materials need that oxygen, that aeration to decompose. They need the surface level fungi, and burying them makes it difficult for them to decompose, but they will. The point of hugelkultur, I understand, is the very slow decomposition over time and providing nutrients. It can, if you're doing it, I don't want to say wrong, but if it's very easy to miss the balance of a hugelkultur. You can have a lot of woody material, and then you fill it up with a lot of compost, and then it's kind of like why, I don't know, I'm not very articulate in this discussion. I know that it's not great to have a raised vegetable garden or planter with 100% compost. That's not good. What hugelkultur can be okay. I'll put it that way. As long as you're really balancing it out, and having diversity is what I mean by balancing it out. So you have your compost, you have your topsoil, you have your browns, so your leafy material or your plant material, and you really should be mixing all that up and kind of packing it in as you go.
But
Go ahead, sorry.
in the world of horticulture, there are room for lots of different opinions.
There
That
are,
you always say that.
yes, there's more than one way to do anything. I am not opposed to hugelkultur. I'll put it that way. But it can be detrimental. Gosh, I'm trying to keep this polite. Do we get a thumbs up, or so?
Yes.
It's fine. If you're having a raised bed and you have material around your property and you want to dispose of that material, like branches, whatnot, you're better off shredding it before you put it in, but that's fine. Breaking up those sticks as much as you can would be better. But I would caution against 100% compost, and I would caution against the large logs. Anything larger than this is it's yeah, I'll just say that. I'll leave it at that. I'm planning to compost at the cottage. What do I do with the ready compost that it may have seeds? You're right. So sorry?
Bacon.
Well, that is the point of compost. So if you are composting correctly, it should get to a temperature that your seeds are not a concern, that potential virus and viruses and bacteria aren't as much of an issue or concern. There always is that potential, because we're not doing this at a commercial scale. We're not heating it up. But if you are composting correctly, it shouldn't be a concern. But yes, there's always a chance that it might have seeds. You just have to stay on top of it. What do you have to do to get ready? What do I do with the ready compost? Churn it. So if it's compost from last year, flip it over, churn it, filter it, see how, if you have large chunks, I'd put that back into the compost for the future year. What are your thoughts on goldenrod? It's a beautiful native plant. Goldenrod is unfortunately the victim of really mean marketing in the world of allergy medicine. Goldenrod will not trigger your seasonal allergies. It is not a problem. It is a beautiful plant with beautiful flowers that is very beneficial to a number of species. Oh, this is a direct message. Okay. Yeah, okay, not a problem. So I'm just gonna paraphrase Juliet, if that's okay. So there with the hugelkulturs, I assume what you were speaking of. The raised beds, I assume you're speaking specifically of the ones at the library. We're really big. They're very tall. And so yes, absolutely filling them up. You need extra material to fill it up with. That's not a problem. That was the foundation of the hugelkultur method fill up a very tall raised bed, and that's fine. Yeah, let me go through, see if I answered everything quickly. Goldenrod, I love goldenrod. It is indeed. Yeah, are there any other questions? Cattails, love them. No sand. Yeah. Sorry, I'm scrolling through the chat right now. Okay. If anything I said was a bit too much or confusing or wrong, if you want to correct me, that's fine. That's quite all right. Send me an email, that's fine. Or send Eva an email because she's, yeah. And I think I'm gonna pass it back over to her because she put her phone down and she's looking at me like I'm hogging the computer. So it was lovely to be here. Thanks for having me. And for anyone wondering that has seen me in the past, my rosemary is doing wonderfully. It's still big and beautiful. Bye.
Goldenrod. Hi everyone. How's it going?
Hi, Eva.
Hi. Okay. Oh, I ended your slideshow.
Oh, you didn't it.
Stop share. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
No, that was fantastic.
Good. Thank you everyone for coming out. I think we're done now. Sorry, Delilah interrupted 400 times.
She's always fun.
She is. Most recently, she came down to grab a book. So yeah.
With a whistle.
With the whistle. Oh, that's great. Okay. Yeah, I think we'll end here unless anybody has any more questions, which I can toss over to Sean.
I still live here, so.
He does still live here. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Night.
Have a good night. Thank you very much. It was great.